Call to order the August 7th, 2023 workshop meeting for Plymouth Township Council. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
All right. Conditional use hearing that's happening next week.
So far, yes.
And is there anything else for us to talk about now, or is it?
No, it's just on the agenda for next week.
Will there be a decision taken that day, or it depends?
That's at your pleasure.
Thank you.
And certainly you can do an exec session after you hear all of the testimony and evidence, and you could make one that evening, or you could say you need more time, and then you can come back at a later time to make a decision.
I won't be here for it, so.
Okay.
But feel free.
We might want the parties, let them know that we'll only have 4 council members available.
Yeah, and Lynn is calling in, so
Yes.
is that okay if the quorum is 3?
That
and the other 3
is,
have to
are you-
She can't see
oh,
the
sorry, we don't have a
exhibits.
Zoom option here. We might let them know that we'll have just one person via phone, one absent. They may decide to continue for logistic purposes, but I guess we'll let council know by hopefully Wednesday at the latest if they're going to proceed. I think we're still waiting for 2 review letters in responses as well. Not you, Lonnie, thanks.
All right, we have a citizen commendation, Michael Leatherby. Anybody want to take that one?
I can do that.
Swearing in, is that something that they'll do, or I'll do?
You will do.
I'll try not to mess it up.
have the oath in next week's book.
Okay. I'd like to take Chris Schwartz if I could. Budget meeting schedule? Anybody want to read that?
Put it on my
I can do it.
Anybody have any questions about any of those dates? Pretty good? All right.
So the November meeting I'm trying to remember, that's typical when it's election day to not meet either on the day before or the day of, well, we never meet the day of election for general.
Yes.
Because I noticed November
That's-
we're meeting on a Wednesday.
Yes, yes. And I guess, John, we're going to try to find out whether October's meeting should be changed to the 10th instead of the 9th. Do you know yet? Or?
I don't know yet.
Okay. There could be a possible change for your October meeting. Brad Fox called that. So, TBD.
I'll just put a hold on it then.
Well, yeah, you would
It
have-
might be what the,
The 10th would be the council meeting if Monday is that.
thank you.
All right. Mutual release and settlement agreement.
That will be Mike or I.
Looks like it.
It's
A lot of words.
our settlement on the Catetta litigation that's been ongoing for almost 8 years at this point. We are not paying any money.
That was the paragraph I noticed.
I figured I'd highlight with that.
All right. Going down to police and public safety, civil service ordinance agreement for first and final. This is what we talked about last week, right? Or last month.
It is, and that would be Mike.
John, anything else? Great job with the National Night Out. Really nice event.
It was great.
Here.
I'll say it again when we get to Parks and Rec. Public Works and Sewer. Stop sign ordinance for Longfall and Red Rowan.
That would be Mike, and that's ready. Advertised.
And the White Marsh Sewer ordinance.
Mike again, and parcel numbers for the new properties on Butler Pike, so that's ready and advertised.
We're going to make them read every parcel. Thank you for adding those in.
Mr. Minot?
Nothing tonight, sir.
Are we just these last two items down here for action?
Yes. And the Outback is in Kathy's area,
Yep.
and Chris, the Aristocare is in your area.
And then the escrow releases are,
First one is Lynn.
Lynn won't, well,
I don't know when, did it by phone?
I mean, I'm happy to read it by phone unless that's difficult, like people can't hear it or whatever, but I'm happy to do it.
Amber Alert.
Tornado, no,
Weather
tornado.
alert.
Then allow crimes if not be the one, that's the plan. It's in the middle of the building.
Okay, thanks.
and Nick for Tamara.
Small group fitness room?
Yes.
And the waiver for Hallowell
Is
is
you.
me.
So that's a request to put Belgian block in instead of concrete curb. And we have two other neighborhoods, I think, that have that, Chris, is that right? And from snow plowing or other aspect, you don't matter?
Some sense, tougher than current, so.
Stronger, like, yeah. But not a problem if it, worse. Plowing or anything like that, so. It's a fancier look.
It is very upscale. If somebody redid their own curb just in the middle of the street, could they choose to use that, or do they have to conform to the rest of the
I'm not sure.
Well, they need a waiver, because the code says concrete.
concrete? That's what I was.
That's what the code says, but others have asked and gotten waivers. Do you have any problem with that?
No, I was just curious.
No,
Just wondering.
majority of council, because that would be a resolution revision
Yeah.
for that waiver for you
Any
to make it.
Any issues
Okay with that?
on this one here? For that development using Belgian block instead of concrete?
It's just visual, right?
Chris says it's no different for plowing or, drainage. I mean, water will roll down the side of that as easily as a concrete curb for drainage.
Yeah.
So you want me to prepare a resolution for that?
Yes. If you need their original, I can get you their original resolution number at least.
I would like the resolution number, yeah, if you can, or if it's easier to just send over the executed one, whatever's easier for Linda,
She's on vacation, so it's-
whatever's easier for you.
All right. Code enforcement and grading ordinance?
Is there anything in the book for that?
I don't think
You want to
so.
talk about the problems we've had?
Basically, we're having water problems with new homes, which doesn't require a grading permit or anything like that. And because, one, the area that they're disturbing is less than what the ordinance says, so we'd like to rearrange that ordinance so we can eliminate all the problems we're having.
What would be the way, so what's currently happening and what would be the change in the
Well,
ordinance that would?
I think it's 5,000 square feet that they have to disturb before.
Acre.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the ordinance is for 5,000 square feet, you have to have a stormwater management plan and a grading
Mhm.
plan.
that we
Above
want.
5,000 square feet, below, you don't, you just file for grading purposes.
So we want to readjust that because all these single homes going up in the valley are causing water problems for their neighbors.
Wow.
Some of them, somebody raised their grade up, so now there's additional water rolling onto the neighbors, totally not
This,
right.
this would only be for new construction moving forward. Do you have an idea?
I would
of-
say new construction and possibly additions because they're still disturbing the ground outside of what's already there.
Do you have an idea of square footage that you would, Lonnie, any thoughts on that? I've seen townships that are, I think.
Could it be any
You know,
regrading?
we originally set this at 5,000 so that a homeowner could expand their driveway or put a small addition on without having to go through engineer getting a stormwater management plan. So kind of would like to keep that intact, but also provide a mechanism for, a stormwater management kicker if the development is like a new house or something like
If they're going to raise the land up higher than what
Yeah,
is
to look at
already,
that.
you
But-
would kick something.
How about if you do any kind of grading on your property, whether it's an addition, a shed, or whatever, you shouldn't be allowed to regrade your property so that it, and is raising property considered grading or not?
that.
So you shouldn't be able ever to do it unless you can guarantee it's not going to harm your neighbor.
So
Put
there's
water in their basement into their driveway.
another municipality that if they're disturbing or improving more than 600 square feet, it requires
Yeah.
either a stormwater
Springfield is 500.
and plan drawn by an engineer.
Yeah.
I can look at some other ordinances and what we work with and coordinate with Lonnie and Tim and come up with a proposal and draft an ordinance if that's what council's inclined to direct us to.
Yeah, Tim's on this. He sent us one other township, he has a few more. So, yeah, and he's aware of the problem, and there's a couple houses come to us, that's what the problem
I've had a
is.
few people bring that up to me, and it's
Yeah.
happening more. And you can just see it when you drive around. You can see how these,
Raising-
what
they're
used to all be
putting
flat.
They're putting basements, and then they're setting the house is already set
Yeah.
higher,
So you have
Yeah.
like some basement
You
windows.
have like a ranch house on a slab, and now you have, a 3-story house with a basement and sump pumps discharging and things like that.
So we need something. We need to change our
Need
ordinance.
some stormwater management
Yeah.
for smaller than
That they do some
than a full house.
underground basins or swales or,
Yeah,
buildings or something on
yeah.
the property.
Yep.
And not affecting the neighbor.
Yeah, if you don't mind forwarding what Tim sent, and I have some
Sure.
that we worked on previously as well.
He sent me over Moreland, he was talking about the others,
Upper Dublin's 599
newer.
square footage. Anything above that requires stormwater review.
You said there's one municipality that has 500 square feet, right?
Springfield. yeah.
Springfield,
Springfield?
So regardless of what you're doing, 500, if you're disturbing
Yeah.
500 square, doesn't matter if it's a
Yeah.
patio or anything.
Yep.
Patio, driveway, addition,
Yeah.
any if the
Swimming pool.
total coverage is more than
There's not much you can do for under 500 square
Okay.
It's worth doing.
Yeah. feet. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm trying to
probably a shed is
visualize.
the only
Shed,
thing you
yeah,
can do.
shed could probably fit.
Okay, we can get started on
If-
that. And I'm sorry.
Just to clarify, that's if you're changing the. I mean, I'm just thinking like, what's that costing somebody who wants
Yeah,
to?
that's why we set it at 5,000.
Right. If somebody wants to put in a patio or like a $1,000 shed, like what are they going to have to pay to get an engineer to draw it?
More than the construction cost of the improvement.
So it would have to be significant. Like, I guess my just question is, what's the measure of you're disturbing or you're changing the grading of the land? I mean, is there a way to?
I was going to leave the number of square footage blank for right now and just put the and we can decide that as council can decide that later on. I was going to put together what it would look like in terms of the review process and what would be required. But I guess you could be talking about a few hundred to possibly a few thousand if you're having an engineered drawn plan for
Yeah.
the stormwater facilities.
Yeah, I guess my question isn't how big of the land, but like, if I have a stone pad right now and I have a shed on it, and I decide that I'm going to get rid of that shed and put a new stone pad in a new shed, am I doing something that I would then possibly have to get an engineer?
If you reduce it to 500 square feet, yes.
If
leave
you're
it at
changing the
5,000.
grading, it seems like you should have to.
you
You're
leave it at
changing the grading
5,000,
of the
no.
land.
But is there, I think what.
Well,
maybe
my
this is what you're getting
question
at.
is, what's the definition of changing the
Changing
grading?
the
Grading,
That's what
yeah.
I was going to ask,
If
right?
you're
So-
replacing same with same, but
Yeah,
just,
or even if I'm
Well,
doing
say with
something.
same,
New
there's
one.
no increase in impervious coverage, so.
okay, so
you're
that's
covered
not the
that way.
problem.
But if I'm doing something where, like, you could hardly notice the slope, like, do I still have to, I mean, what kind of guidance do we give people? Like, if you change the grade at all, like, if there's any, like, incline or decline, that's something you'd have to.
But he's talking about impervious surface. If you've added impervious surface,
Yeah.
the water flows faster over that
The-
and ends up
the
somewhere
way- I think the way
else.
the code's written,
Both.
I think the way the code writes now, it speaks to impervious coverage increases. of 5,000 or more. It doesn't speak to grade changes or
It should have both.
things like that.
Both aspects.
And maybe that's something,
Demographical.
you know, that maybe like that should be an amendment to the existing ordinance and maybe a reduction to the square footage requirement. Some kind of combination of that might
Yeah,
work.
I would just want to err on the side of caution, like resolving this issue that we're having without
Yeah.
creating like a burden for people that want to do something really small. And,
Maximum shed is 12 by 12, and that's only 144
Square
square feet.
feet,
Okay.
yeah.
But
so you're
Now, if
seeking,
they go to
But
zoning-
nobody's building
If you
sheds
waive
that
it,
size, they're all getting waivers for bigger sheds,
Well, then, you know,
but it's more square feet.
yeah.
I think you shouldn't be able to change the grade of your property in first floor elevation, like somebody just raised their property like 2 feet, right? 2
Well,
feet.
at least 12 feet, 12 inches already, and I know it's got to go another 8 inches.
Yeah. That's why I said
Because the
maybe
driveway's up
maybe it's a
here.
combination of impervious coverage increase and a component to grade changes on the property.
It-
And then-
When we're talking about sidewalks, and I'm thinking of the last meeting, that wouldn't dovetail into that, would it? Like if we're insisting people have to install
oh,
sidewalks?
we're getting to that next.
Well, I mean, it
It's
is.
coming up next.
It's related.
Next conversation. Trust me, it's coming up
That's
next. It's not on
technically,
here.
but they're technically not on their property. Sidewalks are in the right of way. So it's really
Okay,
not
so
like
that, so
we
that
can
would,
write
okay. I
that's
didn't want to
on
cause
their property.
additional, like, oh my God, now they have to
Right.
pay for an engineer to design their sidewalk.
I'm
You'll-
curious though, I'd want to be clear about like solving the problem, but not creating something that seems overly burdensome, like not swing the pendulum so far over that. You know, the
Undo.
small, yeah, the smallest change, you know, creates a hardship for people, because now they have to go out and have an engineer come and look and have a stormwater management plan for something that's even a minor change. I don't know where the balance is, I mean, that's not my area of expertise, but I mean, I guess I would want us to look at that.
Just give me a visual of 500 square feet, like relative to this room.
We should go by the ceiling
25.
panels. Yeah, where's Rick? It'll go really fast.
It would be about this room, like,
It's less than half of this room.
But if you're
Well, 5,000
impacting
square
a
feet is the
neighbor's
size of
property,
Pizzeria.
you should not be allowed to do that. I mean, you just, it's
The
wrong.
whole restaurant.
It's wrong to flood your neighbor's house.
my
Create
daughter's
puddles
putting
that
a
are
big
gonna
one.
freeze.
My daughter's right now, they're in the midst of putting a big addition on. They're in King of Prussia. And they're spending a ton of money. So that was part and parcel. They had to have that done.
Mhm.
So, but what I'm saying is if you're doing something
Yeah.
that's going to cost you in excess of $100,000,
And what's another 10 grand for an engineer plan?
it kind
A
of
big
goes along
addition is
with
more
it.
than 5,000 square feet.
Yes.
So-
Not on the first, not on the foot.
Right.
I mean, that's literally the size of pizza.
So can you write it up and we'll
We can leave the square footage blank for now.
come back to that?
And we can come back to that.
Or we could come to the townships.
All right. So I wanted to bring up the follow-up to our conversation about the sidewalks last week. I said this to Karen, I don't like to be wishy-washy. So like, 'cause I know we spent a lot of time talking about this already. So we had a group of 3 or 4 residents, I guess, that came in last week about the sidewalk ordinance for the redevelopment. They all live in the valley. And I guess we have some competing like interests here. And the, number one is we have this comprehensive plan. We talk about sidewalk connectivity, pedestrian connectivity throughout the township, and then we have this neighborhood that for however many years, you know, has never had sidewalks. So I've been thinking about it a lot, and I've gone back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on what I think would be the best course to take. And you know, we've all driven through there, and none of the houses that have been rebuilt have put. I haven't found one sidewalk in there yet. Is that correct?
As of today, the first house that would have had them put it in just got their UNO.
They got it, you know, or they
Well,
asked for
it was inspected for UNO. It hasn't passed because of the sidewalk.
Okay.
So nobody's done it
So
yet.
nobody's done it yet.
Nobody's done it yet.
Yeah.
And one way to look at this is if we enforce it, if we enforce the sidewalks, maybe 50 years from now, maybe 75 years from now, we will have a connected neighborhood of sidewalks, maybe. If this house gets rebuilt, maybe the person in between them decides, hey, while you're putting in a sidewalk, I'll put in a sidewalk. But I think the reality is that for a generation, we're going to have like floating sidewalks throughout that development, which, yeah, I understand what the residents who were here last week were saying about making them build a sidewalk where there's no sidewalk anywhere else. And as I drove through and looked around more and more, I don't know, I just feel like maybe that neighborhood is kind of an exception to the rule, and that there have never been sidewalks, and it would take forever for us to expect that there always will be. So I kind of agree with them, I think, is where I'm at. Even though we already said, and even though we already sat here in this very room and talked about this, I guess I kind of changed my mind a little bit on that and feel as though it would be a little bit of a, I don't want to call it go as far as saying ridiculous, but it would be a little bit of a odd requirement for them to put.
So you want to write an ordinance that takes certain streets out?
No, I think that.
Because what about if someone on Jolly Road
No,
redoes their
I
house?
think that they should just have to get a waiver or whatever process we would use. Like, I don't think I wouldn't want to change anything. I would just want us to be able to provide maybe a waiver for those certain areas. And look, if somebody next to them already had a sidewalk, then they could put in a connecting sidewalk, which might be a little bit different. But to put a sidewalk in the middle of a block where nobody else has one, again, I think every time we grant a waiver or something, I think every condition is every application is unique. I think they're all different. But I don't know. I just feel like we're creating a very odd situation over there if we are putting in random non-connecting sidewalks. So that's kind of where my head was at. And I've thought about this a lot. I've driven through there like 10 times since that last meeting just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. And I just don't know if that neighborhood is a particularly sidewalk type of neighborhood right now.
What do you think of the idea of requiring when a house is sold that a sidewalk has to be installed?
It's
Then
going to
you're
be the
not.
same patchwork.
Well, you
Because
get a
I
lot
think you're-
more sales.
I think if you did that,
Better.
you're putting a huge expense on the person who's selling maybe a $250,000 house to make them build. What
Or
if
they
live
put it on the
what if they-
Especially if they've got one of the
responsibility of
We
original
have to do
ranchers.
it, but we have to do it. If I sell my house, I know I've got sidewalk.
You
Lots
already
of panels
have
that
it.
have to, but I have to replace it. I have to replace curbing. I have to replace apron
Yeah,
if it's damaged.
potential repairs and replacement, I think, are different than
I wonder.
having to
I don't
actually
know how much
construct
more
whole-
of a.
Yeah.
I do think it's less of a burden though when you're going to sell it, because at least now, for a lot of these families, all the residents that come in and said they're here for the long haul. Like they have this intention, so they're going to have 20 to 30 years, maybe 20 to 30 years to plan to put the sidewalk in eventually. And they know, and it also has the option of, yeah, you as the seller need to put it in, but maybe you could
Usually
negotiate that with the buyer.
negotiating piece, yeah.
Mhm. And it's on the buyer to put it in. It just has to be part of the sale that. it
But
goes in.
I still think it creates the same issue, like
I do too.
of just these random sidewalks.
And you've got the post-World War II little rancher that's not nearly as much as these new big mini mansions they're putting in. So it's a lot different than when you're spending a lot of money to go from a small one-story rancher to a big 2-3-story house. I mean, spending a lot of money to put in a new house as opposed to someone selling, a small, original Valley house.
I don't disagree that it's going to look patchworked and awkward for many, many years, maybe even a generation and a half before there's anything there. I'm not necessarily comfortable with exempting like certain neighborhoods like that, because I think it's just a slippery slope. Like if we exempt a neighborhood, then like what's the criteria for an exemption there?
Yeah, I'm not asking to exempt a neighborhood. Like, I think every application is still individual on its own, but I just feel like likely the applications coming in that neighborhood would probably be the ones that we would consider.
Yeah, or we just had a similar request on Butler, right? Right,
The Miller.
The Millers.
That's coming back.
yes.
And
it's-
that's a
it's-
dangerous
exactly,
area to
and that's-
walk.
That's come back because there's not a lot of sidewalks around it.
No.
I mean, I don't know what the solution is, but I mean, I think the only way it seems reasonable to have exemptions is if we said something like, you're exempt. If there's no other sidewalks around you, you're exempt. But if you're in a place where 50% or more of the people around you have sidewalks, then put the sidewalk in. Like, to me, if we had something that was like,
Well, then the valley will never get one, because there are none.
Because there's zero
And
No,
But
sidewalks.
we'll
but I-
never have them because there are none. I mean,
yeah,
you-
I think we'd be conceding certain neighborhoods, but I'm more comfortable, I'm not saying that that's what I'm suggesting we do, but I'm more comfortable with there being a criteria versus exempting a particular street or like case by case having to say like, yes for you, but based on what? Like, there's 3 sidewalks on your street. It still looks kind of awkward and patchworky and you don't want one. There's 12 houses without it.
It
I
could be
don't know, what's-
capricious.
Yeah, it's
what's
so
the
subjective.
decision-making?
Yeah.
What's the decision-making criteria? So I think we'd have to have something, to me, that's a firm decision-making
Objective.
guideline versus, right, like we're looking at, yeah.
When we put, I think it was on Hallowell where there were the 2 houses that were being built and we required them to build a sidewalk where they went around a tree. Was it Sandy Hill or was that?
Johnson Road.
Johnson.
Yeah.
Were they connecting to another existing sidewalk?
Yes. Yeah, because Johnson Commons, the townhomes there, the
Right.
12 townhomes had a sidewalk.
So that was one thing I was thinking is,
Yes, they had to put 2 sidewalks in.
you know, that
Right.
like instead of just being arbitrary about it, you know, maybe a criteria is that
But
if
it's
you're-
still
if-
subjective.
But if you're building next to a sidewalk that you can connect to, you
If
have
you
to
can
put it
connect to
in.
a si-
But if
connecting
there's
to
no
a sidewalk is
sidewalks
not
on it,
subjective.
there's no
There's a
sidewalks
sidewalk.
on any side of you. I hate to put too much, to say too much, because every situation, you never know when a situation might arise where we'll say, man, we're kicking ourselves for adding that, for being that specific. But I just think, like, again, if you, not just, kind of case by case can be a little bit hairy too, but I just think in this particular one that we talked about, it just seems reasonable.
I think you need criteria. Otherwise, it's subjective. It opens you up to favoritism.
Yeah, it does.
You need criteria. What is the criteria for giving the people in the valley a waiver, but the Millers don't get one? You know, what's the, and the new Powell development gets a half a waiver. I mean, what are the criteria? I think you need criteria.
It pens us in more, but I think it also seems more fair and objective over time.
Jim, what is it? It currently just says any new construction at all needs a sidewalk.
Not any new construction, any new construction of a new home. If they do an addition,
Right.
it's not
right.
required.
Yeah, but if these people were in because they took down the outside wall,
Took down
so
their house
then
and
it
built a
became
new
new
home.
construction.
It's not a short-term solution, but there was also part of that discussion at the last meeting about there at one point being a grant that was available for sidewalks in the whole neighborhood that the neighborhood rejected. Yet I heard people say, like, we're not opposed to this. We actually kind of like the idea. We just don't want to have to pay for it.
Well,
So-
yeah. Everybody
Which I-
likes free stuff.
Right, and that one would have been, that one that we were talking about would have been, not the whole neighborhood, but one street, one side of like, so
One
it
side
would have been a
of the
whole
street.
connecting street. So I think it's a little bit different than, you know, one sidewalk for one house and one for the other ones. But yeah, I think the general consensus last month was that everyone likes the sidewalks. It's
Yeah, they
a-
just don't want to pay for them.
Right.
Which I get.
And they want them all in at once.
Yeah,
right,
but maybe.
which isn't going to happen.
Maybe along with our plan for walkability, we do need more of a master plan around going for some of these grants or doing things that might take care of a neighborhood at a time, and that may take a generation as well. But if we were able to get grants and cover a neighborhood, or one side of the street in a neighborhood, at least then we'd probably get less resistance and less of a patchwork look. So I don't know that that is the solution. We'd still have
And
to
that
answer the
also-
question for these residents in the moment, but
And if our criteria ends up being you have to connect to an existing sidewalk, that gives us the opportunity to go into a neighborhood that might never get them on their own and put a sidewalk in to actually start building off of.
Well, that defeats the comprehensive plan.
Yeah,
If there's
like-
no sidewalk, you don't have to have a sidewalk.
But that's where I think doing something that's more community-based, like if we could find, again, grant money to help start sidewalks in areas, so then there's something to connect to, and there's more of a contiguous look. I mean, again, that's a long-term solution to a short-term question and problem, but maybe we need to tackle that as part of the bigger picture.
It's going to be hard to find a grant that's 100%, that doesn't have a bigger public benefit.
At best, it's
Yeah.
80/20.
And then it has to have a real public benefit.
Yeah.
Like, Germantown Pike, with bus stops and
Or
things.
Butler Pike because of
Butler
bus
Pike,
stops,
yeah.
people walking
Fair
up and
enough.
down.
Probably wouldn't be in front of individual homes. I don't think you'd ever get rid of it.
When this ordinance was written, were some of these questions considered about specifics or about exceptions?
That part of that ordinance is very old. That's old. I mean,
Yeah, the
hasn't been
ordinance
changed
says
in 30 years.
council can tell
Yeah.
any homeowner
At any time to
to put in a sidewalk
You really
in
could.
a certain amount of time.
You never have.
So theoretically.
Theoretically, Chris, there's the,
That's already.
You're gonna need the
that's-
chief to get you to your car.
That's already.
anybody listening to this live?
But anyway, I mean, to Lynn's point, agreed, like, we have a short-term situation here and we have long-term. I guess my immediate concern is what we do with the short-term, because there's clearly,
There's a house that passed their inspection, and now they need their UNO. They're ready to move in, but do or do they not? Their sidewalk.
Oh, yeah,
They've been
we-
told they do, but they've been told they do, but they haven't done it yet.
Correct.
I feel that in that valley, that there are going to be more and more people wanting bigger houses, and bigger families, and I just think that, I mean, look how many are going up already. And so the trend in the valley is to, either expand or completely demolish and rebuild, and you will start having, it'll be more the exception that there's not a sidewalk. It'll be kind of like some of those older places on Jolly that don't
right,
have
but
sidewalks.
I agree with that, but I think that we're talking many, many years from now that would be the case, many years.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time. There's a lot of houses. I mean,
Nick might be the only one here at that point. I mean, here.
Here,
Not
here,
in
on
this
this-
room.
on this
Not in
planet.
this room.
We can tell anyone to put in a sidewalk at any time. That's what the ordinance says. Is there a way to write a waiver that says once enough neighboring houses to a property have reached this point, they have to, whoever's gone on it to put it in?
We have to define all of that, and we'd be at risk of whether we're making it effective and how we're starting to enforce it.
Is there a way to
Would be
define
difficult.
certain streets, like through street, you know what I mean? Like defining like a heavily traveled public transportation running
They're
on
all
it?
cut-throughs.
There's an ordinance that talks about which streets get public services. Snow plowing, trash removal, and things like that. So, I mean, that has been done here. We have that already. Some get snow plowing, some don't, some private roads, because all the public streets get it. Some private streets are called out by name, what services they do or don't get.
If, just theoretically speaking, if this person who's ready for their UNO, if they came and said, we'd like a
Tornado warning.
The last one was a warning also.
Mine on silent,
Yeah, but the emergency
I know.
alerts come through.
no matter what.
Yeah. The last one was a warning too, Jim, but this one's extending it to 7 instead of 6:45.
So much for thinking I should have off.
Jim, how would this? What would be like for this person in this situation? Would that be something that we all that we have to approve the waiver, or you could just sort of give them the
Waivers
I
would have to be
think
approved by
council would
council.
have to approve the waiver.
right?
So have those,
And even though they've already submitted all their plans, we could still do that
If they come and ask you for a waiver for the
at
sidewalk.
any time. Like if they did it if they came next week. Like, is there an order of operations that have to occur here, or just any time before they actually get their UNO permits?
I mean, Jim could also issue a temporary
That's
use and
one conditional
occupancy,
UNO, give them
subject to
30,
council's
60 days
decision.
to put in the sidewalk. And if you give them a waiver, that will go away.
But what criteria, so one by one, these people come to us, what criteria are we using so we can't be accused of
Our ordinance is
favoritism,
silent.
subjectivity, selectivity? I mean,
I think our ordinance is silent with any criteria whatsoever. It does not contemplate, other than just saying council has the power to not require them.
Like, isn't that better?
No,
So we just
this
sit
is
here and
better
just,
because you
I
don't
mean, I
want
I
two
would like to
neighbors
have
to,
criteria
one
before
you
I say,
approve,
you
one
have to
you
put in a
don't.
sidewalk and you don't.
There's
I mean,
nothing, there's no reason.
What's my rhyme or reason for saying Jones's you put in a sidewalk, but Smith's no?
No, I agree with you that it is better to have criteria. The ordinance doesn't have any criteria.
I know it
I don't
doesn't,
know
but
what criteria
I'm
we
not
would be
comfortable
interested in
going
exploring. But I guess the issue with these immediate neighbors would be, it doesn't sound like they're planning on putting in sidewalks from their conversation last month, and they haven't submitted a formal letter requesting a waiver to you yet. If they do, then certainly council can entertain with our lack of waivers for the reasons that you've all discussed. If you're interested in doing that way, we could look at coming up with potential criteria if that's how if council wants to amend the ordinance.
I mean, again, I don't want to sound like I'm overly simplifying this, but like, here's a blanket, here's an entire neighborhood that has 0 sidewalks. Like, to me, that's the reason why they don't have to put in a sidewalk, because the entire neighborhood doesn't have any sidewalks. How many homes are in the valley? Hundreds? Like, none of them have sidewalks. So, if you're building a new house in a neighborhood that has hundreds of houses and none of them have sidewalks, like, I mean, I think that's the answer. Like, it's not a very scientific answer,
I
but
think the house that is in question here, that gentleman, the owner, was here last month. And in the minutes, he said he doesn't mind installing sidewalks, but he believes it will look silly without everyone having sidewalks. That was his comment.
right.
Yeah.
But he was one of the ones here, and he is ready. Said he doesn't mind putting them in.
So the criteria
Yeah,
is aesthetics, and my aesthetics may be different from someone else's aesthetics.
I think we can't have
I don't think
criteria
that
that's
would be the
aesthetics.
the
I think if
criteria.
we
That's
have
the only
criteria.
reason he gave.
But you
It's gotta
can,
be
well, that was the only reason he
pretty
gave. It
Yeah, I
doesn't have to be the
mean-
only reason we approve it.
Reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I would make the criteria, and in some ways, if we have criteria, it pens us in more, but I think it's a safer way to go. And I think we say something like, if within, 1,000 feet of your home, in any direction, 50% of the people have sidewalks, you put a sidewalk in. And I'm just making the numbers up. I don't know what 1,000 feet looks like. I don't know if 50% is the right number. But to me, that's safer and easier. It's not subjective. We don't have to, factor in the aesthetics and wonder if, maybe, that, it's kind of like the neighborhood over in the valley.
So what
Is
about
it
when you
really?
put in a new subdivision? It's farmland?
They-
No sidewalks?
Salvo, they would have to put it.
Yeah, that's different.
That's
Yeah,
different?
that's
This
another-
is
They're just a
so-
single
so-
homeowner?
yeah.
Okay.
Current single-family lots.
Yeah.
If you take Erwin, you say 1,000 feet, Germantown Pike
Has sidewalk.
Yeah.
has
well, that's
sidewalks,
what
so that means everybody on Erwin would have to put them in.
Yeah, I mean, I just made, it's a
Yeah.
good point, Jim, and I think
Yeah.
we'd have to be thoughtful about what, and I don't know what the range is, or
I
if it's
think we have to look at
50%
the
is
name.
magical, but.
We have to look at the nature of the streets. Like, if
Like-
there's a street that has public transportation running on it, that there have to be sidewalks.
Yeah, if the
You know,
20, if the
we
20.
read
Other than
the
school
ordinance.
There's public
buses.
safety involved with getting a connection to a bus stop. That is a reason to require them to put in a
Well,
sidewalk.
buses
If there's
stop
a
on all
lot-
the streets. If
Yeah,
your
well, I
child's
said other
getting
than
picked
school
up.
buses, but I mean, you don't have SEPTA going down through the valley streets.
Yeah, or maybe it's the number of structures, if 20 structures to your right and left, I mean,
With a
I-
certain
whether
number of lots or
feet
whatever.
works. I mean, I don't know the exact criteria, but to me, a criteria seems better than each of us guessing each time if this was fair. If what we're doing to the Millers is as fair as what we did over in the valley.
Well, the Millers should get a waiver. On this criteria, the Millers get a waiver.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, but I
street
mean,
are
we.
the Millers on?
They'll be asking, the letter's already.
I know,
Yeah, no,
I saw the
I-
letter, and they
Yeah,
have a
I saw
lot
the
more
letter.
But
reason.
I'd like to treat them the same way, whatever,
Right.
whatever that means. The same way means they looked at it,
Regardless.
Well-
whether they're on Butler Pike or in the valley or Narcissa or wherever.
I think we need time to come up with what we think would be some more specific guidelines, but again, we still have a sense of urgency with those that are about to be required to have them, that are right in front of us. And again, I agree with that. I like the idea of sidewalks within proximity being part of the criteria. I just, I don't want, if we're at the end of the day, we're going to agree that, these houses in the middle of Erwin Road shouldn't have to put in a floating sidewalk, then they shouldn't have to put it in while we deliberate what we're going to do.
Want to do a conditional? know? And
Like
gives
do a
certain
conditional on-
number of days and
I
then
need a date
council
time,
continue
or
to.
date.
I would do a year, allow time, council to discuss if
1 year.
if we do any changes to the
A
ordinance, having time to advertise and go through the process, especially if you're going to take any criteria or ultimately grant that waiver under the new ordinance.
Yeah.
That's fine with me. We can write something up that we actually stick on the UNO that is a conditional UNO until council decides if sidewalks will be required. If they repeal it, you don't need them. If they don't repeal it, you will have to put them in at that time.
I like that. I feel like it gives us,
Give some time.
gives us
to
some time
thought.
to be thoughtful. I mean, I think we're debating it, but, maybe just having some additional time to think it through, think about what the criteria might look like,
Yeah,
and get some additional
I
Can
feedback.
we write something up?
I can write something up, yeah, I
Some
just.
of what I said that I can stick on every UNO?
Mhm.
Okay.
But with them understanding that it could be that in a year, they need to come up with the money to put in the
Well,
sidewalk.
that's why it would state it's a conditional UNO.
Yeah.
Will the
And it
mortgage
gives us
companies
a
accept that?
specific time.
They will.
We have to
Yeah,
come
I'm
up
dealing with
a
this in another
decision.
municipality on behalf of a property owner, and there is no issue,
Okay.
yeah.
Just checking, because sometimes banks want to make sure before they give you a lot of money to buy a house, that all the conditions are met.
Sorry to complicate things, guys, but
No,
It's a good debate. It's
Yeah.
important.
Mm-hmm.
Means a lot of money to a lot of our residents.
All right, anything else for code enforcement?
I have not.
Who'd like to read the zonings?
I can do those.
Any questions about any of those?
No, I did talk to, I left a message, Joel's on vacation this week. There's the last one, they do say they want to put the fencing up to the sidewalk on Plymouth Road, which is part of their front yard, but I did tell them it'll have to be out of the right of way of Plymouth Road, so they really can't put it like at the sidewalk. But it's the state roads, whatever the right of way is, it'll have to be, on their property, not at the sidewalk. But other than that, they're all fences, sheds.
Well, they weren't planning to go into the right-of-way, were they?
Well, yeah, if they go up to the sidewalk, they're in the right of way, yes. So that's what they say, so he'll have to let the
Stop
zoning board
short.
know. You have to
Yeah.
stay on your property.
Yeah, on the
Not
actual
in the
property.
right of
Got
way.
it.
Are there other fences on Plymouth Road yet? In those properties?
Pardon me?
Are there any of those properties along Plymouth Road have fences in their backyard yet?
Backing up to Plymouth Road.
Probably around where Grixel was, or Vale New property. A lot of them, I think, probably
So
do.
that's what they mean of this development.
Right,
Do other
of
people
that-
have their
in
fence?
that
Like
development.
almost every property that's been built is a call for a fence.
I know on Johnson Highway, every one of
Right,
them has
those
it.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't recall if I've seen any on.
Or on
on
Johnson
Plymouth yet,
Road.
Yeah, this is at the corner of Alexander and Plymouth. This is the first one, I don't know, the restaurant.
but- All right, Nick's got those. Parks and Rec, upcoming events. Phil, great job with National Night Out.
Yeah.
Told you I'd bring that guy. Who'd like to read these?
I can do that.
One other thing, we're gonna try to do some fundraising and have a drone show for the tree lighting. So we'll need about $5,000. We're gonna try to get that together. So the sponsors will get their names in the drone, so that's pretty cool.
Very cool.
If you know anybody, send them our way.
What's a
drone
drone
show?
show?
What?
Say more about a drone show.
Well, the drones can spell things and shapes. All winter holidays will be represented, and it'll be out over the
Pictures.
soccer.
They have lights.
They're really
It's a light
cool.
show.
It's almost like, yeah, it's like a light
It's
show.
like a light
fireworks,
show.
sort of
Yeah.
quiet
Almost like
and go out.
fireworks.
Some communities are doing it instead of fireworks,
Right,
with
exactly.
no sound,
Right.
but all the lights.
Okay, that's really,
We
that
can
would
get you a
be
big
fun.
one. It's pretty simple.
I trust you. I trust
Philly
you. Say it's cool. I
Philly
trust
fanatic
you.
had it,
Yeah, it's
so- But we need $5,000, so we're gonna kind of link to the game. We can't do it this year, but next year, so.
Anything else, Phil?
Oh, that's all I have. Thank you.
Citizen Board vacancy announcements?
I can do those.
Should we have EAB on there as well?
Does the EAB have a vacancy?
EAB, I'll check.
Who left?
We lost Carolyn Nichols.
What's that now?
We lost Carolyn Nichols, was on the board and. was
Oh, when did
dropped.
she leave? Recently? Because
She
we
didn't
had
know- she
Andrew
didn't
Conboy's
notify
on
us.
there. Did he
Carol-
take?
I know Carol, she didn't notify me or Linda,
Oh,
so she's no longer on the board.
She needs to
Send us an
send
email.
something in.
yeah. Should I ask her to send something?
If, yeah.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't realize. Okay.
Something else not on here, but I wanted to bring up. So Lynn and I earlier, I guess it was last month, met with Preet and Keystone about the mall and about the ongoing zoning issue with multifamily. And they sort of presented kind of an overview of what their plans would be throughout the site.
This is related to the zoning hearing board at all. You might want to hold it in the exec session.
I think this part I can say.
Okay, just be
So
cautious.
we had discussed, stop me if you think you should stop me, the idea of
Before
potentially
getting into
having
the litigation?
a sort of a public special meeting for them to show their,
You're good with us, then?
yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to be careful.
Right, so we thought about having in September maybe the opportunity for them to show in a public forum what their vision and their long-term plans are for that property with what they would like. A chance for them to kind of show, a chance for us to do some Q&A.
Chance for residents to.
Yeah, for
speak.
residents to speak and share their thoughts.
And that would be for the whole mall, like their vision for the complex, not just.
It's a little bit of everything, yeah, it's a
Okay.
little bit of everything.
Like all the parking lot restaurants and the apartments and the
Correct.
tower building,
Okay.
Keystone building, I mean.
Sort of the next generation of that property, I guess, if you will.
It's what we've been waiting for.
Yeah, September too soon, or,
I think,
I mean, they're ready to go?
It sounds like there's more in exec session.
yeah, I mean, I would want to
discuss.
do it as soon as possible. I mean, yeah, like we get into our budget meetings in October and then, so,
November is 3 and.
and again, I think if we do it earlier before, it gives them a little bit of an idea of what the feedback is.
Yeah.
And the last thing, I did circulate this already to council, but do you want Mike's office to start reviewing the plastic bag ban ordinance, or not yet? I know Bill's coming in September to make another presentation, but he did ask that email, so I just didn't know if there was an answer, or wait till the September presentation and then,